Thank you so much, Councilmember Spriggs. I'm really pleased to have the two different dynamics of the very different cultures, very different cities, but I think you both brought out a really important theme, which is that you have, a part of this, looking at sea level rise and coastal resilience is really this community dialogue about your vision for your community in the future. And it involves not just the, physical information, but really about what are the economics, what are the social considerations, and it's tough. There's no real easy solution for it. So I do want to say that, as we're thinking about this and where we are with this, it may feel like we have a lot further to go, and we're still just kind of getting started. But San Diego really is helping to lead the way. We are one of the regions that is moving fast and moving quickly at really looking at this. And some of our partners up in the state, in the Bay Area, are also doing this, but they're not really that much further ahead than we are. Everybody is tackling this, and these are hard and difficult questions to ask. And we all realize that they may take some time in that, spending that time having that dialogue and really understanding the information at hand and talking to stakeholders is super, super important. So I just wanted to say, hang on. The train might be just leaving the station, but really you should be proud of our region for really stepping forward and having leaders, like we've heard today, really starting to grasp this and working with their community to have this dialogue. So with that, covering our regional perspective, I thought it'd be great. I'm going to introduce Brian D'Agostino, who's a meteorologist at SDG&E. So he's very clued into what's happening with the weather, and I'm always getting really great fun facts from him about records that we've been having in terms of extreme heat and precipitation and all sorts of stuff. But Brian's been the lead at SDG&E overseeing this ICF project to really look at one of our important critical infrastructures, which is our natural gas and electricity, which obviously crosses city jurisdictions and is one way that we as communities have to work with our utilities and our other regional and state agencies in terms of looking at this question. So I'll kick it off to Brian.
Thank you. And with that, I'll be pretty brief to make sure that we get an opportunity for plenty of questions. But a lot of what we do in the meteorology group is we're bringing the best information we can to our decision makers. So that's part of how we're running some of these projects. Heard some great points about mitigating climate change as opposed to adapting. A lot of what we're going to talk about today is our thinking with adaptation, but I am proud to say a lot of mornings when we look up at our energy profile, we're bringing in over 300 megawatts of wind from the Imperial Valley Ocotillo Wind Farm, which is a new one, and now we're over a gigawatt of solar coming in from Imperial Valley. So many mornings, right about 10 o'clock before the ramp of energy comes up, we can be 65% renewable energy across San Diego. So we're heading in the right direction there. Certainly leading the state and the country in that department. But we are here to talk about adaptation. Part of what we have tried to do to bring the best information is, try to be part of the bigger picture. So we've partnered with the Department of Energy, their partnership for energy sector climate resilience. We're getting a lot of information from that. But then here what we're specifically going to talk about a little bit more is a partnership with the California Energy Commission. And that is really looking at vulnerabilities to sea level rise in San Diego. So specifically, some of the discussion points and some of the things that we wanted to talk about is, when we structure how we look at sea level rise, we're still coming to this bigger dealing with climate, and having the infrastructure in San Diego with the fires in 2003, the fires in 2007, which of course we have looked at extremely closely, the fires in 2014, we have learned a lot about how we start to adapt to this changing climate and increasing wildfire. So part of it is how do we take what we learned from that whole process over the last decade and apply it to adapting to sea level rise. And I'll show a slide in a second that kind of gives our framework of how we look at wildfire and the different facets of it and how we can apply that to sea level rise. And then sea level rise planning, how does that fit into a company like SDG&E? And to summarize some of this, I mean, we have an enterprise risk management group. You figure we're a really big company and we're under SEMPRA, so we have all of Southern California. So across the whole organization, we have dozens of risks day in and day out. So part of how we're starting to think about this is, you know, climate is its own risk in and of itself, but we're so integrated into the environment around us that climate will impact many risks across our organization. Wildfire is a big risk for any company operating infrastructure in Southern California. So how does climate impact our wildfire risk? How does sea level rise impact our system integrity risk? And that's how we really are getting climate information into our core business, is by integrating it into our pre-existing enterprise risks, if that makes sense. And I'll be able to answer any questions that exist there. And then just to touch on El Nino, I mean, we prepared, as we all know, a year ago. I mean, we were, even as the meteorology group, we were running around all of our departments saying, get ready, it's coming. And, you know, it never materialized like a lot of us thought it had the potential to, or as it still did have the potential to. But, you know, one of the things, there were unexpected impacts. The only one I share here is, I think, with either the warmer water, I still don't know for sure what's causing it. Somebody from Scripps might know. Whether it was the warmer water or the higher sea levels, we were getting some ventilation of either the underground infrastructure or overturning of the water, that we were getting a high number of aerial gas reports. Where when you get phone calls and you're at SDG&E that says, I smell gas, I mean, these were happening a couple times a month, and you're getting hundreds and hundreds of calls, and you have to respond to every house. It becomes a huge task, and it was happening over and over again. So something that you don't necessarily think about, but became a huge implication on the utility. So looking at the steps and how we look at a climate risk. Now, I know we're focused on wildfire here, but that's because we've done so much work in that. Is one, you have to be able to anticipate when you have an issue. Now, for us, that becomes, when can we see that 100-year storm? When does this happen? So there are efforts. We actually look at storm modeling, damage modeling, and start looking at being able to anticipate. You know, we understand that we have different assets that could be impacted in a 100-year storm, but how do I know if the storm that's coming is a 100-year storm, so that we have to do something about it? So that's the first step. We're actively developing these models. Another one is preparing, and then reacting and executing. So when we start looking at that, a lot of that is developing operational plans. I'll give you an example of when Sandy was approaching Con Ed New York. You know, they thought through the whole process beforehand and said, gosh, if we're going to get salt water into lower Manhattan, we're going to have to really find a way to reroute energy so that Wall Street doesn't go out for 4 days. You know, these are the things that we have to think about in advance. You know, how can we establish a backfeed to Mission Bay? Because if we see a 1 in 100-year storm, we can't flood out all the infrastructure and have a high tourist area out for 2 weeks. So that's something that we're developing. And we're doing all of this with ICF International as well. They're really helping us with that. And then that ability to recover. You know, how have we hardened the infrastructure? And this is also where you end up working with these other utilities. You know, Entergy, that had to deal with Katrina. PSE&G and Con Ed New York, as I already mentioned. What have they done? You know, because they went in after their major flooding events, and they had to adapt their system as soon as possible. So what lessons did they learn? And a lot of what we're finding is, you take the areas today that are prone to that 100-year flood, and you make them susceptible to salt water. So how can you go in and make it that if salt water touches this electric infrastructure and it's prone to these surges and these big storms, we need to make it that we could probably just de-energize it while the tide comes in, and then after everything drains, we can turn it back on and it'll work, as opposed to having it come in and destroy all the equipment. So that becomes the priority and what we're looking at. Our timelines here, this is the CEC grant that we're working on. The team there is looking at the latest Cosmos information. Robert Kay from ICF has been reaching out, and we're looking at all different impacts. So this isn't just sea level rise. We're also looking at other climate impacts to the system. But we're in that situation that we have a GIS folks that are pulling it down, overlaying it onto our infrastructure, finding out what information can be done when. But then as you look at this phase we're in now, as we get into direct impacts and indirect impacts, what we're doing is we're pulling ICF, those, the researchers and the scientists, and teaming them up with the folks that manage those risks for SDG&E. So we're our job in the meteorology group is let's get the right engineer with the right scientist and understand it enough to kind of facilitate that discussion, so we can integrate the right science with the right engineer and bridge that gap so that we can get some standard developed to start making headway. And then we'll be, looking at the different adaptation measures, and so that's our overall plan. In the interest of time, I think I'll keep it at that, and maybe we can go to hand it back to Laura.